Nvidia's new driver update has come with two features I've been looking for a really long time. This is the driver 581.08, released Tuesday, August 19th, time of filming. Who knows when you're watching this? Anyway, the big highlight features are support for global DLSS overrides in the Nvidia app and support for Nvidia Smooth Motion in Nvidia app on GeForce RTX 40 series GPUs. So quick overview of what's going on here. So the DLSS overrides there's a bunch of different versions of DLSS, and older versions don't necessarily look as good as the newer versions, but older games aren't necessarily updated by the developers to have the newer versions of DLSS. So using the DLSS override allows you to ask the game to use a newer version of the DLSS algorithm, which can look better than what is built into the game. However, previously you had to go into individual games and set this feature. Now we should be able to go into the global settings and just say always use the latest version, and that should generally be the best way to go for most games. You could always adjust it individually if you're having issues with a particular one. Now, the other really cool thing here, again, is support for Nvidia Smooth Motion in the Nvidia app on RTX 40 series GPUs. So what's going on with that? So Nvidia's Smooth Motion seemed to be kind of an answer to AMD's AFMF, a driver-level frame generation for games that don't have frame generation integrated into it. It's important to note that games will look better using frame generation that's actually built into the game. So if DLSS frame generation is already built into a game, that's not when you want to be using Smooth Motion. This will be useful on games that don't have frame generation built into the game, but you want to use it anyway. This will have less access to game information, so it will generally produce lesser quality, but it is, in some situations, probably going to be preferable to not using any for some users, and it's nice to now see this available on 40 series GPUs, which it was not previously. Now, to get the access to this, though, we do have to update the driver, and if you're watching this right at the time of filming, Nvidia has stated that you have to get the beta version of the driver. Sorry, of the Nvidia app. You do this by going into Settings, you go to About, and you go to Early Access, opt in to access beta or experimental features. So you will want to check that box, as well as download and update the driver. They said it'll take a week before it'll be into the non-beta version. So if you wait a week, you'll have this. If not, click the little beta button. There you go. All right, I'm gonna install this and let's test this out. But maybe you're like, Daniel, I don't care if Smooth Motion's coming to the 40 series. I'm still on like a GTX 970. Maybe you need a PC upgrade, and Jawa.gg is the place to look. They're having an amazing back to school sale, which also, back to school is a great way to justify to your family that you definitely need a PC upgrade for school. It's also just a bonus that it's amazing now for gaming. Anyway, you can shop limited time savings on student-ready PCs, laptops, and more. You can get entire pre-built systems. You can find exactly what you're looking for with Jawa's PC Finder. You can search for performance in specific games, but you can also look for certain CPU, GPU combos, etc. You can shop by theme to make sure it's a perfect match for your new dorm room, whatever you're setting up for the school year. But how are you gonna fund this? You sell your old hardware on Jawa, turn your gear into extra cash. Now you can create your own listings, become a Jawa seller, even make that a side business, but you can also go for maximum convenience and just click the get an instant offer button, and you can sell your GPU or CPU to Jawa for cash, and you can get an instant offer. It's super convenient. Jawa's highly reviewed, and even better, I can get you $10 off your first purchase if you use code OWEN10. Check the video description and or pinned comment for a link, and a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring today's video. One issue you may run into that I just ran into is after installing it, restarting my computer, which is usually best practice, I still didn't see any global settings. I'm going to graphics global settings for the DLSS overrides. However, I restarted my PC yet again, and I am now seeing that the Nvidia app seems to have a update ready to install. So I'm gonna try that now, and I'm hoping the global settings do actually show up. All right, looks like the update has applied and is giving me the highlight of this now being available as a global setting, but also they're mentioning another thing that I think is really cool that I had wished previous versions had. Sometimes it's hard to tell, like, okay, I think I've applied settings, are they really applied? It looks like now with Nvidia's Overlay, you are going to be able to monitor the DLSS version that is active in the game. So we can set the override in the global settings, but then actually confirm through the overlay whether that's applied. That's pretty cool. Looks like there's also been some updates to G-Assist, etc., but those aren't necessarily huge things I'm interested in. Although there does appear to be also some new settings that were previously located in the NVIDIA control panel, which is the older and separate app, now also being available in the NVIDIA app, which is kind of nice to get more features moved over there. Looks like, anyway, you can see them right here if you're interested, but there's some new features available in the NVIDIA app as well. All right, sure enough, it is showing up. So again, you go from wherever you're at in the app to graphics, you go to global settings, and now it is indeed actually showing up. DLSS override model presets, and it defaults to using whatever the app normally uses. However, we can now switch to custom versions where you can select which model you want for each thing, or the simplest thing for a lot of people would probably be to just click the use the latest version for everything. And then, you know, if you have issues in a particular game where a certain DLSS model maybe isn't looking as good as an older one, you could always look into that on a case-by-case basis. But I think for a lot of users, just using the latest DLSS model applied globally through the settings is going to be the simplest thing to do. And so I think we should try this out. This also gives us a separate one for DLSS super resolution if you want one, you know, separate from the model presets. So I think we're up. Now, what this is talking about is if you want to use like specifically force DLAA in maybe a game that doesn't have it. Because older versions of DLSS integrated into games didn't have a full native rendering resolution where you're just using the deep learning model for anti-aliasing, but still running at 100% of resolution. Now, this has a pretty high performance cost, so you'll only want to use that if you're in like maybe an older game that you can already run at high frame rates, etc. But you can kind of set things through here. Now, personally, I would say that this is probably one that you wouldn't want to set as a global preset. That's the kind of thing that I would probably want to adjust on a game-by-game basis based on how much performance I have in the game. So I'd probably leave that off as a global one for me. But I think, yeah, setting the latest model for a global preset is going to be pretty cool. Let's test this out, but then we'll also want to test out these smooth motion frames, which are now showing up and no longer giving the warning that I require a 50 series GPU to use. All right, so to test this out, I've loaded up a game that I know has an older version of DLSS. This is DLSS 3.7.1 and does not feature any DLSS frame generation support. So this is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a lot of other games we could have looked at. And so what you'll want to do is, first of all, click Alt-Z. This is the hotkey for bringing up the NVIDIA Overlay. And I want to check on a couple of things here. So first of all, you can go into the statistics in the bottom here, and then you can show statistics in the heads-up display. You can toggle that here. You can also hold Alt and R to toggle that separately. And now you can see in the top right, I've got some stuff being monitored here. Now we can change what we're gonna monitor, but also for the purposes of this video, it might be nice to make that a little easier to read. So you can also adjust the settings on that, configure heads-up display. You can increase the font size if you want to, or decrease it, so that's gonna be a little bit easier to see. You can change the text color, etc., all of that, but hopefully you guys can see this now. Now, what we're gonna do is now change what we're monitoring, because this is one of the things that was just added to the app, which is kind of cool. So in statistics view, you can go to custom, and then you can view all. Now you can put a checkbox next to anything that you want to be monitoring. I have things like frame rate, GPU utilization, CPU utilization, average PC latency, which I've noticed in some apps doesn't seem to be reading properly. So Maybe for this one, we'll turn that off since that might be misleading. But here, this never used to be here. So under features, we now have the frame generation model override, which we can monitor. And if I click that, it shows up in our things here. Now the model override is whether you're using a newer version of the frame gen model or an older version. But there's also a mode override. This would be like the ×2, ×3, ×4 frame gen mode, which some games that have built-in frame gen only offer the ×2 mode if it's an older integration, but through the driver, you could override that with a ×3 or a ×4. However, that is still features that are exclusive to the 50 series GPUs. There's the super resolution model override, which again is, are you using a newer version of the model? Which again oftentimes would offer better image quality, but not always. Sometimes there's issues and you'd want to revert. And then there's the super resolution mode override. That's whether or not you're using, like setting an override to use DLSS quality or DLAA if the game doesn't offer those the specific one that you're looking for. So there's that, and then there's ray reconstruction model override, and then ray reconstruction mode override. I believe the mode, man, is that gonna be whether it's the transformer model? I'm actually not 100% sure on that one. And then smooth motion used to already be able to be monitored, and that is still here under this features tab. So, and right now I have everything inactive. So right now that's what things look like with nothing turned on. Now, one thing that I wish you could do is turn these things on while the game is active without having to restart it. But what I'm gonna have to do here is quit out of the game, actually turn on some of these features, which I currently have turned off in the Nvidia app, and then restart the game and see if we notice any differences and the mod. All right, so I've turned off the game, I've gone back into my Nvidia app, and once again, I'm gonna turn on the global override to the latest version, and we're gonna go ahead and have a look at that. Now, I want to report on what I think may actually be a little bit of a bug, because I'm having to re-record this section of the video because initially the super resolution mode didn't apply into this game after using the global settings set to latest. Now, one thing that's nice is that having the statistics overlay tell us whether the super resolution override is on, tells us whether that was working, and I noticed that after applying the global settings to latest, it still said super resolution override off, which doesn't seem right. So then I went into my my Nvidia app, and I noticed that if I looked at the individual program settings for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, that the DLSS override model was still set to use 3D application settings, not to use the global presets. I then went in and switched it over to using the global as the default, hit apply, and then, now in this case I'm gonna have to restart the game, because these settings don't apply while you're in game. You do have to restart the game if you had the game running. So they have to be applied while the game is off, and then the game is restarted. Now if I do this, it's gonna go ahead and work. Which I'll show you in a second, but then I did click on other games, like were they set to use the global? And they were then set to use the global. Now, in the meantime, I think I had closed the Nvidia app and opened it again. So in other words, I'm not sure if the global settings applied immediately to everything. I may have caught a little bit of a bug. So again, my process was I applied it individually to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Then it seemed to apply to everything else, which we'll double check on here. But you want to make sure that if you do look at the individual program settings, that the DLSS override model preset did go to using the global settings. Because the whole point of the global setting for this is just to be like, yes, please always use the latest setting in all of my games. I don't want to have to set it individually. So initially when I was like, wait, am I going to have to individually change each game to use the global setting? That was going to be really obnoxious. But like I said, in my experience, after applying it to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth individually, I then checked on other games and it did seem to be applied. So I don't know if this one game had a bug or if I had to apply it to one game to get all of them to register it, or maybe it just needed the app to open and close again. Not quite sure what happened there, but let's go ahead and show you that now it is indeed actually overriding it correctly. All right, so you can see now that the super resolution override is actually working. We can see that it reports preset K, whereas previously it just reported off. So to understand this, different DLSS models, as they train new AI upscaling models, these different models get a letter name. K is the latest version as of the time of filming this video, and there are two different versions that are considered DLSS 4 transformer model. There's J and K. So presets J and K are the DLSS 4 transformer model, which in most cases in most games will look better than the older DLSS 3 models, which have different preset names. Anyway, so we can see now that it is indeed actually applying it, and so it is really nice to have this statistics tab allow us to see that, because again, that helped me notice that the global settings hadn't initially applied due to that bug or it just needing more time to adjust the games, or who knows what it was. Anyway, can't speak, guys. Okay. I was gonna say that looking at the specific image quality of preset K in this game compared to like the DLSS 3.7.1 that was initially integrated into the game, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. Usually the DLSS 4 transformer model will have a sharper look to it compared to older DLSS 3 versions, and that's why you want to use it. But as always, you can, try it out for yourself, and if you think it looked worse than what you had before, just go ahead and turn it off, and you can change that in the individual game settings, where you can have the global setting turn on the latest version, and then you can just revert back if you need to. Now let's go ahead and look at smooth motion. So notice that right now SM is reported as inactive, so we're not using smooth motion. And notice that our frame rates running around are, around 60-ish FPS. Right now it's a little bit higher, around 70. If I'm running this direction, we're, maybe dropping into the mid-60s, lower 60s. Depending on what exactly happens, it might even drop into the upper 50s. But yeah, we're hanging out a little bit above 60 FPS. Now, this game is a reasonable candidate for smooth motion frames because the game doesn't have its own frame generation. So notice that if I go into the actual graphics menu in this game, it does not have any frame generation. Games that have frame generation directly integrated into the game are games where you should use the frame generation that is directly integrated into the game, because that means the game can give the frame generation algorithm more information than the driver level smooth motion frames. They can tell it more about motion vectors, what's happening in the scene. It can be more aware of what is a HUD layer. Now, frame generation can deal with HUD layers in different ways, but some games can at least make it a little more aware of what's happening with HUD elements, things like that. So, in other words, if a game has frame generation already in it, you shouldn't be using smooth motion, but this is a game that doesn't have it, and also generally, especially driver level frame generation, I think is best used when your frame rate is already around 60 FPS. Now, different people have different tolerances for this, but remember that frame generation will increase the frame rate, but it doesn't increase the responsiveness of the game. And in fact, it has to render 2 frames and not show you the latest rendered frame to decide what happened in between by kind of interpolating the 2 frames. And then it shows you the in-between frame that it interpolated before showing you the other complete frame that it had rendered. In other words, it buffers a frame, so it might introduce about half a frame of latency compared to how the game was otherwise operating, right? So it makes the game have smoother motion on the screen because there's more frames presented to the display, but it doesn't increase the responsiveness of the game. So that's just something to be aware of, and that's why you want the game to already be pretty responsive, like around 60 FPS for a lot of single-player games, before kicking it on. And then it can help on a high refresh rate display to increase the motion fluidity that you're seeing. Now, one annoying thing with this is compared to something like lossless scaling, which is like a $6 app on Steam, so it's not free, lossless scaling I can just kick on in-game. I can just click scale and then boom, it turns on, so I can instantly A/B test it. Unfortunately, to turn on smooth motion, we are going to have to turn the game off, apply smooth motion, and then turn it back on again. Also, I would note that in the global settings, I would leave smooth motion off for those reasons I was just stating. It's useful in certain circumstances, but I wouldn't want it to be applied by default to all of my games. So I'm gonna go to an individual program setting and then turn on smooth motion for this individual program because it doesn't have in-game frame generation available. I'm already getting around 60 FPS, etc. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and kick on Smooth Motion, but just again to prove it, note that Smooth Motion is still inactive. It's not actually working yet. I have to quit the game and restart it. All right, after restarting the game, we can now see that Smooth Motion is reported as active, and we can also see that our frame rate is around 100 FPS. Now notice that frame generation doesn't usually actually double your frame rate, despite the fact that it is kind of inserting a generated frame after every single actual game frame. So why wouldn't it be a complete doubling? Well, it has a performance cost, a performance overhead. So let's say we were, I think, around 60 frames per second or a little over 60 frames per second in this scene previously with Smooth Motion turned off, but because of the overhead of running the Smooth Motion, we've really dropped down to about 50 frames per second in game, and then it's doubling it from there to about 100 frames per second. So that's how that works. There's a bit, so it kind of takes your frame rate decreases because it has to run the algorithm and then doubles it from there. So it's not going to double it from your frame rate previously to having Smooth Motion on. But we are getting around 100 FPS now. So if you're on like 120 FPS display, this might be worth trying out to see if you get better motion. Again, it's all about smoothing the motion on the display. It is not increasing the performance. And if you already have an app whoa, I'm noticing FPS dropped around 50 FPS here all of a sudden. Not amazing. Interesting. I wonder if we're actually running over VRAM issues on the RTX 4060, and that's kind of hurting the implementation. So I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but notice the frame rate numbers are down in the 50s now. Now this is an issue you can run into on 8GB GPUs. Is that using frame generation actually has a VRAM cost. So if you're in a game that's right on that 8GB VRAM border, and you go ahead and kick on a feature like frame generation, whether it's driver level, Smooth Motion, or otherwise, it's possible that you can actually overload your VRAM buffer and decrease the performance, which I think is what we're seeing here. So anyway, kind of lost my train of thought, but the point is, just try Smooth Motion on a case-by-case basis. Check if you notice any image quality artifacting, check if the game still feels responsive, and especially if you're on an 8GB VRAM card, check if things actually got worse because perhaps you spilled over your VRAM buffer. That being said, there are definitely cases similar to lossless scaling where I think people will prefer having Smooth Motion on to having it off because it can, again, smooth out the motion on the display. So something to keep in mind there. Anyway, I don't have enough time to be doing a whole bunch of like image quality testing, etc. So I think we've accomplished the main goals of this video. We have tested that Smooth Motion does indeed work on 40 series cards now, which is good to see. Again, caveats on, careful with your VRAM situation. We've seen that the statistics overlay can help us now confirm whether or not these features are active, and having the global preset to apply the super resolution override to the latest version in all of your games that support the override feature, again, not every game supports the override feature, is really nice to see. I did run into that one bug where initially it didn't seem like the global settings applied, at least to this game, but after applying it to this game and then checking other games, it does seem to be applied now. So do check out for that bug, and again, it's nice to have the overlay allow us to check that we do have the preset K applied and Smooth Motion is active. All right, I think that's enough for today's video, just kind of showing you how to use these features and making you aware that these features are now available. Let me know what your experience is with them in the comment section and all that, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.